You don't need to squat, bench press, or deadlift. Yes, I've had people get so defensive over this idea like it's some powerlifting cult within sport. And when I talk squat, bench, or deadlift, I'm talking the traditional barbell back squat, barbell bench press, and conventional deadlift. You don't need to do these lifts as a fighter. That's not to say that you can't or shouldn't do them. I'm saying you do not need to. And I'm going to explain why with science, but also with personal experience, because this is also part of the equation when we're talking about the art of strength and conditioning, especially for combat sports. By the end of this video, you'll have substitutes for these exercises that will give you some of the similar adaptations, so you can have some more variety within your training program. But of course, check the first links in the description. The free MMA, Jiu-Jitsu, and boxing and strength conditioning blueprints are there, and a 7-day free trial on the Sweet Science of Fighting training app is also there. So let me come to my notes, but most people are stuck in this exercise dogma around exercises. And it's usually gym bros that don't lift, and don't actually coach, and haven't studied anything within exercise or sports science. Or it's just purely online coaches that have never coached in the real world. Now, I understand online coaching is a really good business. There are some really good online coaches out there, do not get me wrong. But there are things that can only be learned in person, coaching under pressure and coaching hundreds of athletes over many years. And this is one of them. It's around exercise selection. So let's come back to the squat, bench press, and deadlift. And as I said in the beginning, there's nothing wrong with these exercises. There's the application, like with many things, that is very wrong. And here's why. Exercises are the tool to drive the adaptation you're trying to stimulate within the training session. And these traditional barbell lifts are some of the best at overloading with load, which means you're typically overloading force. But that doesn't mean it can't be done with other movements. And it also means it can't be done with other forms of training. Think of machines, single leg work, and other variations that can provide similar training stimuluses or similar training stimuli. But what's more important is understanding what are the adaptations we're trying to drive from training. And that way you can start to think of exercises that would fit into whatever you're trying to achieve. When you don't understand what you're trying to achieve within a training or a certain exercise, then it becomes very hard to substitute an exercise or move away from a more dogmatic approach to exercise. So typically I like to break it down to something like neural, muscle structure and architecture, morphological, which is more fiber type. And then you could go down the road of coordinative, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. So if we start with the neural adaptations, we're looking at things like motor unit recruitment, rate coding, and also known as firing frequency. The squat, bench, and deadlift, epic for motor unit recruitment. You're getting heavy loads, you're tapping into your high threshold motor units, meaning you are starting to use your faster twitch muscle fibers because the force thresholds start to jump up, and they make a great tool for this. For rate coding or firing frequency, it can help sustain these impulses to the muscle to keep it firing as well. Perfect. However, they might not be so great at speeding up this firing frequency to be able to improve the ability to produce force faster. And that's even if you're trying to do speed squat, speed bench, speed deadlift, which is often pulled over from West Side, where speed work is done with 50-60% of 1RM. Unfortunately, this is not speed. Within a powerlifting context or strength sports context, sure, we can call that speed training. Within a sport like MMA, boxing, where you have tenths of a second to be able to generate that force and execute a movement, it is not speed training. So if you take a look at this graph here, I can show you exactly why. This is the bench throw and the bench press. The bench press is the white squares, the bench throw are the black squares. And you can see the speed continues to increase with the bench throw all the way through to release, whereas the bench press speed starts to decelerate at around 50-60% of the concentric phase, which means that the second half of a traditional barbell lift, you're spent decelerating the barbell. Again, you're using these exercises for a certain training stimulus, but you need to be able to do other things to address other adaptations. So let's look at the next one, structural and architectural changes. We can look at muscle fascicle length, pennation angle, cross-sectional area, tendon thickness and cross-sectional area, squat, bench, and deadlift, awesome. For fascicle length and pennation angle, you're looking at slightly maybe opposite adaptations to what you typically want as a fighter, where you want longer muscle fascicle lengths, you want shorter angled pennation angles, which allow a faster contractile velocity. Again, you're not just doing squat, bench, and deadlift anyway, but typically when people are saying you must squat, bench, and deadlift, their programs are very skewed towards maximal strength training. And then you have the morphological side, which is muscle fiber type. Now, if you're just doing squat, bench, and deadlift, typically you are essentially shifting muscle fiber type more towards type 2A, which are your fast-twitch muscle fibers that are more fatigue resistant, which within combat sports, I think is great. But if you watch my previous video breaking down the physics principles for fighting, you'll see load isn't the only way to create overload. So what would I potentially replace these traditional lifts with and why? And let's start with why. First one, equipment limitations. Not everyone maybe has the space to do certain things. Maybe you don't even have a bench and can't do bench press. Maybe you don't have certain barbells, whatever it is. Equipment limitations are a real thing. And I'll run you through some examples in a sec. Second one, injuries, niggles, and restrictions. Sometimes people's lower backs can just not like deadlifts or squats. Sometimes people's shoulders just don't like bench press. These are real world problems that need to be worked around, and trying to fit someone into a barbell lift is not the answer. So here are some of my favorite squat variations or alternatives. Hand supported split squats, easily one of my favorites. And even you can do hand supported squats or Hatfield squats with a safety bar. Both of these are great high load exercises. You got your leg press, you got your belt squat, you got heavy sleds, you got hat squats. There's a million exercises you can do that can be loaded just as heavy as a back squat. I've had athletes that suffer from chronic knee pain, and it's a real problem within professional sport. And would actually manage it, they wouldn't squat, would manage it by using sleds as the main lower body movement. Backward sled drags, sled pushes, that would be their main movement, just because squats just keep flaring up their knees. They got to be able to play every weekend, they got to be able to train. By forcing them to squat, and especially with the barbell, is not the answer in these situations when you need athletes to be healthy. If we're looking at the bench press, things like weighted push-ups, dumbbells, machines, you have less variation with the upper body, but you can still get a lot done. And as an example, we had a European Championships preparation for rugby, and we were basically training out of a shoebox. I'm talking having an entire team split in half, about 20 athletes at a time. We had one squat rack, and we had 2 barbells, and then we had like a cable column and barely any space. In this example, there is no way to be able to use the bench press. And this is a sport where you're running into other people. You can honestly see the similarities between combat sports and rugby. So we didn't bench press, of course. We used the weighted push-up as the main pressing movement. And we would just load plates on their back, and they would go to town, 5 to 6 reps heavy. And you cannot tell me that you're not getting the same or similar stimulus from a heavy weighted push-up than a bench press. Then finally, for the deadlift, you got trap bars, and you got any Olympic weightlifting variation can fit into this alternative area. Now, I've had athletes that would literally just trap bar deadlift and push the heavy sled as the lower body work, because squats and deadlifts just did not sit with them. Their back, their knees, whatever it is. And the athlete that did this trap bar deadlifts and sled pushes, he was an absolute fucking unit. So am I saying to never squat, bench, and deadlift? No, they are great lifts, but people are married to them like they're the only way to get stronger and better at their sport. And it's not the only way. That is the message I want to hammer through in this video. You do not have to do these lifts. They're good, but they don't need to be done, and there are other ways to go about it. And if you watch this video next, and you really want to squat, bench, and deadlift, I show you why slowing down the eccentric phase on these lifts is likely making you slower.